Number 159, Missing Identity. This episode would be a lot higher were it not for the pacing. The twist would have hit a lot harder if it had more time to build up. Number 158, Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. This is a really classic SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward plot from the first season. Number 157, Handemonium. This episode is a decently action-packed episode, and it's usually a treat when I can say that about a SpongeBob episode. Number 156, Perfect Chemistry. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to make an episode about nothing but fart jokes and make it funny. Number 155, The Wreck of the Mauna Loa. This episode is a lot of fun, and they managed to have a twist ending that's not completely insulting. Number 154, The Krabby Patty That Ate Bikini Bottom. Whenever SpongeBob tries to do these sort of B-movie parodies, they usually get it right, once again with this episode. Number 153, The Original Fry Cook. This episode delves into the history of the Krusty Krab, and much like Friend or Foe a few episodes before it. And I have to say, I like this episode, and I like Jim as a character. Number 152, Graveyard Shift. This episode is one that a lot of people really like. While I'm not as high on this episode as most, I still think it's pretty good. Number 151, Fear of a Krabby Patty. This was the first episode after the first movie, and while the animation might seem off, it's an overall well-written episode. Number 150, Larry's Gym. Starting in late Season 9, there were more episodes focusing on side characters, and if this episode is an indication, they should do it more. Number 149, Single Cell Anniversary. An overall heartwarming episode with a good musical number. Number 148, Unreal Estate. This is one of the funnier episodes of Season 10, which was a dry season comedically. Number 147, Gary Takes a Bath. This episode does exactly what a short should do. Tell a lot of rapid-fire jokes, have a plot that's easily wrapped up in 7 minutes. This episode does both of those things really well. Number 146, Patrick's Coupon. This is a really good Patrick plot, and I think they should do more like this one. Number 145, Chatterbox Gary. This episode is decently funny and an overall good story. Number 144, Jailbreak. In a sea of mundane episodes in early Season 9, this episode shined as interesting and decently comedic. Number 143, Doodle Dimension. While some people don't like this episode and some really like it, I think it's good, but I also recognize its flaws. For example, some jokes from SB129 are reused verbatim, and the episode acknowledges Frankendoodle while ignoring it at the same time. Number 142, Picture Day. It is really refreshing to see a boating school episode that has nothing to do with SpongeBob failing his test. Number 141, The Way of the Sponge. This is a karate episode that manages to separate itself from the others in a very good way. Number 140, Krabby Land. So, this episode is one of the worst received episodes of Season 3, and I don't really know what the problem is. It's hilarious to me. Number 139, The Sewers of Bikini Bottom. The plot is constantly moving in the episode, plus it brings us to an interesting location. Number 138, Krusty KRUSHERS. This is a case of SpongeBob and Patrick's obliviousness working, because someone is trying to kill them and it ends up backfiring, leading to more comedy. Number 137, The Two Faces of Squidward. This episode is sprinkled with jokes, and the really big one of Handsome Squidward at the end is quite hilarious, and spawned sort of a meme in and of itself. Number 136, The Abrasive Side. This is how you do a jerk character correctly. Number 135, Stormy Weather. This episode is one of the more wholesome episodes of the series. Sure, it might be weird at first, but isn't that what this show does best? Number 134, One Krabs Trash. Also another funny episode, as Krabs gets his comeuppance for being way too greedy with the soda drink hat. Number 133, Jellyfish Hunter. This episode is quite funny even with Krabs' exploitative measures, as he does get proper comeuppance in the end. Number 132, Texas. This episode is a really funny concept, but honestly the stakes are kind of low. I mean, why would Sandy leave the cast in only the first season? Number 131, Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. This episode actually feels like an adventure, which, as sad as that sounds, is actually rare for SpongeBob. Number 130, Growth Spout. This episode is decently funny and is really an episode that makes KRABS look like he gives a crap about Pearl, which is unfortunately rare. Number 129, The Executive Treatment. Seeing Patrick in a business environment seems like such high potential for jokes, I'm surprised they didn't do it sooner. Number 128, Overbooked. This episode is constantly moving and there's never a dull moment, which is especially refreshing in Season 6. Number 127, Not Normal. I gotta say, this episode could have been really dry and boring, but that's part of why it works so well. Number 126, Rockabye Bivalve. Squid Baby should honestly take notes from this episode. The episode you tried to rip off is way better. Number 125, The Donut of Shame. This episode is one of those feel-good episodes. Patrick is desperately trying to save a donut for SpongeBob, which is a lot better than some of his other appearances. Number 124, Hello Bikini Bottom. This episode tells a really good story and has a good musical number at the end. My only gripe is that the middle portion is a bit slow. Number 123, Club SpongeBob. Another example of how to do squid torture right. He actually deserves it here because he's the one that got them stranded in the first place. Number 122, Chum Bucket Supreme. This episode is fun. Number 121, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3. For a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode, you'd expect them to be in it more. Still really good though. Number 120, Doing Time. This episode is really funny, but I have to move it down a few notches for the nonsensical ending that basically resolves nothing. Number 119, The Secret Box. This episode is outside the top 100 for a reason. It would be a lot funnier if we found out what was in the box at the end. Number 118, KRABS vs. Plankton. This episode takes the courtroom shtick and uses it to good effect. Also, it's decently funny. Number 117, As Seen on TV. This episode is really funny, but in Season 3 that's true for a lot of the episodes. There are quite a few we have yet to get to. Number 116, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4. This episode is really funny, although it's a bit mundane by Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy standards. Number 115, Chocolate with Nuts. Yeah, I bet you'd never think this episode would be outside the top 100. Well, there's a reason it's not in the top 100, and that is that, as funny as this episode is, it's a bit lighter on story than even the standards of the other really funny episodes that are light on story. Number 114, Culture Shock. This episode is an example of how you do those double standards correctly, because Squidward is arrogant and posh in this episode, and it works. Number 113, That's No Lady. So, in this episode, Patrick becomes trans accidentally. Gee, I never thought in a million years I'd say that. And you know what? It actually works. They somehow managed to pull it off in this episode. Number 112, What's Eating Patrick? I really do enjoy the story here. The only change I'd make is to have KRABS be less of a jerk. Number 111, Mr. KRABS Takes a Vacation. I enjoyed this episode because it's a KRABS episode that manages to not get stale. And it also plays up that father figure relationship he has with SpongeBob, which is something that is nice to see. Number 110, Squeaky Boots. While the boots in this episode can be a bit annoying, seeing KRABS go insane is funny enough to make up for. Number 109, Gary and Spot. An episode focusing on the pets is actually not a bad idea, and this episode proves that it can be fully realized. Number 108, Lame and Fortune. SpongeBob and fortune cookies. Not the connection I'd make, but I'm certainly glad it was made. Number 107, Treats. This episode takes a really sweet and heartwarming story and puts annoying meows as the background noise. Take those out and you have a top 20 episode. Number 106, Black and Sponge. This episode is just so ridiculous I can't help but find it funny. Number 105, No Nose Knows. This episode is pretty funny, especially by Season 6 standards. Sandy's Rocket. I would like this episode a lot more if it weren't for the abrupt ending, but it's still pretty good. Number 103, Krusty Love. This episode is really funny, although it is a romance plot, which I'm not too crazy about, but it's done pretty well here. Number 102, No Hat for Pat. This episode is a really creative plot that leads to good jokes. The only reason it's not higher is the epilogue. Number 101, Life in a Day. Living Like Larry involves watching this episode. Seriously, check it out. Number 100, Survival of the Idiots. The Dirty Dan joke is honestly enough for this episode to be funny. Enough because of how long they drag it out without getting old. But it's a decent story as well. Number 99, The Krusty Sponge. So, yeah, the show is self-aware. Number 98, Plankton's Army. Plankton's family is hilarious in this episode, and gags like the Sheldon one are some of the best of the whole show. Number 97, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. Of all the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes, this is probably the most forgettable, but I am certainly pleasantly surprised when I go back and watch this one. Number 96, Sing a Song of Patrick. This just seems like a natural Patrick plot they would have done years before they did it, and it paid off. Number 95, Neptune's Spatula. Hands down the best story of Season 1. Not best episode, but best story. Number 94, Sponge Guard on Duty. This episode isn't the flashiest with the humor, but sometimes you don't need that. It's a decently funny episode, and sometimes that's nice. 93, Goodbye Krabby Patty. While the title might be really clickbaity, this is actually one of the times where the show delivers on that. This was the last episode of Season 9 to air, and I just want to put in perspective. I was in elementary school when the season started, and I was in high school when it finally ended. Number 92, New Digs. This kind of plot just seems natural for the show, and that's what makes it so great. Number 91, Pat Nocchio. Here we have another episode that used a unique style, and it's honestly really good because of that. Number 90, No Weenies Allowed. This episode has some of the most iconic jokes of the whole show. It was a shoo-in for the top 100. Number 89, Frozen Face-Off. The specials in Season 8 tend to either be just okay or some of the best of the whole show. This obviously fits into the latter category. Number 88, SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout. Wow, they actually managed to do a TV movie correctly. It's amazing. And that trusty slab scene alone was enough to put it in the top 100. Number 87, Lost in Bikini Bottom. This was the first episode after the second movie. It definitely feels a lot like Fear of a Krabby Patty in that regard. Kind of slow at first, but still pretty good. Number 86, Wet Painters. In general, this is just one of the funniest episodes of the whole show. Number 85, Jellyfishing. For this being one of the first episodes, it introduces the concept of its world building and does a decent job. Also, any writer that plans to do squid torture needs to watch this episode. This is how you do it right. Number 84, The Whole Tooth. Hands down, one of the best Patrick episodes to date. Number 83, Suds. This episode is just relatable. We've all been sick before, and this episode is really funny about portraying sicknesses. Number 82, Procrastination. This episode uses a relatable premise as a joke vehicle, no pun intended, and it does a great job of it. Number 81, Plankton. So this episode is Plankton's first appearance, and it's a better introduction to him than people give it credit for. Number 80, Bad Guy Club for Villains. This episode is sort of interesting. It's an episode of the show within a show, and if any episode deserves a sequel, it's certainly this one. Number 79, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. For a character introduction episode, it does its job and more. Number 78, Employee of the Month. This episode is something that's really underrated. Squidward getting wrapped up in SpongeBob's antics is really fun. Number 77, Shell of a Man. Seeing SpongeBob try to imitate KRABS is really funny in this episode, and that's what makes up the bulk of this episode. Number 76, SpongeBob vs. the Patty Gadget. So this is the best Season 5 short in my opinion. The way they go with the sort of poetic narration is a really good style, and they somehow managed to put a good twist ending in a short, so props for that. Number 75, Enchanted Tiki Dreams. Seeing SpongeBob and Patrick actually do something nice for Squidward here is really refreshing, especially in Season 7. Number 74. Sandcastles in the Sand. Seeing the fight of the sandcastles here is just really fun to watch. Number 73. Grandmom's the Word. This episode is actually a rare occasion where KRABS actually helps Plankton, and it's a pretty good watch. Number 72. Christmas Who. So after seeing this one, you know which Christmas special I like better. This one's still really good though. Number 71. Patrick the Game. I know people aren't as high on this episode as I am, but I find the characters playing the game to be really funny, even if the plot is a bit on the weak side. Number 70. Pressure. This episode explores the dynamic between Sandy and the sea creatures, and manages to tell a lot of good jokes in the process. Number 69. Suction Cup Symphony. This episode is actually really clever. Squidward gets so annoyed by SpongeBob and Patrick that he actually writes them into his music. Number 68. Crabborg. A lot of these really good episodes are hard to describe without just saying they're really funny. This one especially. Number 67. Frankendoodle. This episode is one that I actually think is a bit overrated. Does that mean it's bad? Of course not. Number 66. Nasty Patty. This episode is quite interesting. SpongeBob and KRABS really think they killed a man, but their jokes actually work because the audience knows they didn't. Also, the oblivious cops in this episode are really funny. Number 65. Imitation KRABS. This episode is a really fun watch, especially if you watched it back when there weren't 9 million ripoffs of it. Number 64. Squilliam Returns. This episode is really funny, and the plot is constantly moving. Plus, SpongeBob forgetting his name is must-see TV. Number 63. Squid Plus One. If this episode were made before Season 9, it would probably be really boring, but there are enough little jokes sprinkled in that I really enjoyed this one. Number 62. Dunces and Dragons. This episode uses the night theme to great effect, and uses it to tell jokes quite nicely. It's also a 22-minute long episode that actually fills up the runtime. Number 61. Pizza Delivery. This episode is a classic, and the squid torture actually works here because he sticks up for SpongeBob in the end. Number 60. It's a SpongeBob Christmas. I've gotta say, the animation here is top-notch, and it's a good Christmas story. You don't need much more than that. Number 59. Your Shoes Untied. This episode would probably be a few dozen spots lower if not for the song by Ween. Don't get me wrong, it's a good episode, but it's kind of slow at times. Number 58. Welcome to the Chum Bucket. Talk about this episode? Nah, I don't really feel like it. Okay, but seriously, Plankton getting fed up with SpongeBob in this episode is hilarious. Number 57. Bulletin Board. Wow, there's an actual allegory about cyberbullying in SpongeBob. That doesn't seem like something this show could pull off, but it works because it's not drenched in references that could date this episode. Number 56. Clams. One of the earliest memories of my life is watching this episode in a rerun. It had to have been a good episode to stick that long. Number 55. Life of Crime. Seeing SpongeBob and Patrick take something seriously that doesn't matter is really funny. You could also say that's what I'm doing by making this video. Number 54. Chum Fricassee. This episode is ranked so high because it's a good execution of a character team-up that we don't see very often. And I have to say, I laughed more than what you'd expect from a Season 8 episode. Number 53. The Smoking Peanut. This episode has some really classic lines, and seeing SpongeBob panic this much over something so ridiculous is really funny. Number 52. Something Smells. For all the episodes that were ranked low because of SpongeBob and Patrick's obliviousness, take notes. This is how you do it right. Number 51. My Pretty Seahorse. This episode is another classic from Season 3. There's not much more to say than that. Number 50. Snail Mail. This episode has some decently funny jokes, but the real reason it's this far up is because of its creative story. Number 49. Squidville. I like the plotline of this episode, and seeing the other squids. It's a really good character study on why Squidward is the way he is. Number 48. Battle of Bikini Bottom. This episode comes up with a creative idea and uses it as an opportunity for a lot of really good jokes. Number 47. Wormy. This episode is just so ridiculous I have to laugh at it. Also, I know it really wasn't intended this way, I mean, it was made like 17 years before, but aren't the townspeople a great metaphor to the COVID response? Number 46. Squid Noir. This episode could have easily been a case of a style over substance, but what we got was actually really refreshing for the show. Number 45, Spin the Bottle. I'm honestly amazed at how they managed to come up with a novel idea so late in the series. Sometimes I think they're running out of ideas, but this episode reminds me that they can still come up with some really creative concepts. Number 44, Jellyfish Jam. Back when this type of episode was a novel idea, it was quite refreshing. It's sad that Sanctuary and Housewarming basically tainted the reputation of such a great episode. Number 43, Krabs a la Mode. This is a classic Krabs vs. Plankton episode executed beautifully. Number 42, The Algae's Always Greener. This episode is how you do a role reversal correctly. Number 41, The Paper. Most people seem to think this is one of the weaker episodes of the first 3 seasons, and I have no idea what those people are talking about. I was practically laughing from start to finish. Number 40, Spy Buddies. This episode is decked in spy parody and uses the theme as a vehicle to tell really funny jokes. Plus, this ending is how you do a nonsense ending right. Number 39, Krusty TOWERS. This episode is one of the funniest of the whole show. It utilizes a creative plot to its full potential. Number 38, Krabby Patty Creature Feature. This is an example of an episode that takes a parody and runs with it. I don't know how they managed to make an actual good gross out episode, but they did. Number 37, Friend or Foe. This episode's a bit light on jokes, but I think the story really makes up for it. It's honestly one of the best stories this show has ever told, and expands a bit more on Krabs and Plankton's lore. Number 36, Rock Bottom. This episode is really funny and creative, and to think it's based on a pun. Yeah, a stupid pun. Number 35, Big Pink Loser. This is one of Patrick's most hilarious appearances, and shows the versatility of that kind of character. Number 34, Idiot Box. This episode as a concept actually seems like it could be really boring. I don't know how they managed to do it, but this is one of the funniest episodes of the whole show. Number 33, Bubble Stand. An absolute classic. If you haven't seen it, go watch it right now. Number 32, Walking Small. This is one of Plankton's first appearances, and we see his dynamics with SpongeBob develop here quite well. Number 31, Mermaid Man vs. SpongeBob. Trying to insert Plankton into a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy plot is something you think they'd do a lot earlier, and this episode proves it fits just too well. Number 30, Dying for Pie. Seeing Squidward think he killed SpongeBob is a hilarious idea, executed really well in this episode. Number 29, Roller Cowards. Seeing SpongeBob and Patrick try to prove they're men is a shtick that's done a lot on this show, and this is the best episode of that type. Number 28, Planet of the Jellyfish. This episode's another B-movie episode, and one that's really good. It takes the style and runs with it. Number 27, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. Another fantastic Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode, and one of the more high-stakes episodes of that type. Number 26, Midlife Crustacean. Ah yes, the episode I made a whole video on. Seriously, this episode was way too funny to be banned. Viacom, if you have to ban something, please trade this for something at the bottom of the list. Number 25, SpongeBob Meets the Strangler. This is an example of the oblivious character done right, and one of the best examples of that I've ever seen. Number 24, Plankton's Pet. This episode is a bit light on jokes, but it really tugs at the heartstrings in a way most episodes can't pull off. Number 23, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 6, the motion picture. This episode made me laugh harder than anything has in a while. It was a constant onslaught of joke after joke after joke. Number 22, Can You Spare a Dime? The way I see it, there are 3 possibilities. 1, this episode's really funny. 2, this episode's really funny. Or 3, this episode's really funny. Number 21, Mermaid Man Begins. Hands down, funniest episode of Season 8. The ending sequence alone shot it up to the top 25. Number 20, The Fry Cook Games. This episode is one of the more creative concepts in Season 2, and I think one of the funniest. Number 19, Sailor Mouth. This episode is truly a classic. It's right on the line of what the FCC will show to children, and to that I have to say, bravo. Number 18, The Inmates of Summer. This episode could have been really annoying, but instead it's really funny. Partially because they're in a prison they don't deserve to be in, but they still manage to annoy the warden more than me. Number 17, Artist Unknown. This episode is one of Squidward's best appearances, and the double standard actually works here because Squidward is a real jerk in this episode. Number 16. No free rides. This episode cements itself as being one of the funniest of the whole show. Number 15. Earworm. This episode is a great take on a relatable problem most of us have, and they managed to strike the delicate balance of not having the song be really annoying, which is definitely a good thing. Number 14. FUN. No, it's not here just for the song. The episode was actually one of Plankton's first appearances, and it's a really good show-off of his character. Number 13. Just One Bite. This episode is a really funny take on Squidward's holier-than-thou attitude, and it's hilarious to watch even without the deleted scene. Number 12. Pineapple Invasion. This episode's another one from Season 9 that uses a creative concept to its fullest potential. A lot of episodes from before then would take a creative concept and do nothing with it, but Pineapple Invasion manages to be funny and tell a great story. Number 11. Pull Up a Barrel. Hands down one of the most creative ideas of the whole show. It expands on the lore while also being really funny. Number 10. New Student Starfish. This episode is one of Patrick's stronger appearances and is one of the funniest of the whole show. Number 9. Sold. This is just a really solid episode. The plot is constantly moving, and the episode is really hilarious, especially with Squidward trying to act German, which I have the feeling that if he tried imitating any other nationality, this episode would get banned. Number 8. Mall Girl Pearl. This episode gives the spotlight to a character we don't get to see often, plus the background Easter eggs need to be seen to be believed. Number 7. Band Geeks. If you did a poll of what episode people said was their favorite, I'd bet this episode would be most people's favorites. And yeah, I can totally see why. Number 6. Mimic Madness. This is one of the most popular episodes of the whole show, and for good reasons. Tom Kenny's voice talent is really shown off to good effect here. It's essentially face freeze done right. Number 5. The Camping Episode. This episode is one of the funniest of the entire series, and the campfire song makes it that much better. Number 4. Karen's Virus. If not for the visuals alone, but there are more than just the visuals with this episode. The creativity and lore that goes with this story makes it a masterpiece. Number 3. SB129. This episode utilizes a particular style that was certainly ambitious for the first season, but it paid off, certainly. Number 2. Snowball Effect. This episode is the pinnacle of an escalation episode where the characters get so into their snowball fight it's quite hilarious to watch. And of course there are some of the more subtle jokes that elevate this episode.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
The number 1 episode of the show is We Gotta Get SpongeBob. I'm just kidding. No, it's the Krusty Krab training video because there's not a single moment in this episode that doesn't make me laugh almost 2 decades later. It's truly a masterpiece. I just wanted to record this part in person and say thank you for sticking with me through this whole series. I know it took a bit longer than some people expected it to, but I'm glad that I finally got my thoughts out on pretty much every episode of SpongeBob. Obviously, not the season 13 episodes. But just thank you, and if you like the video, leave a like. Check out my other videos. They should have a couple popping up on the screen. And follow me on my social medias, which will be linked below. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.